News, views, voices of the global Indian community. India abroad.
The last time I went to India, I was very young, but I know that it's still much of an issue, but my image of India is there's a huge divide between who is rich and who is poor, and I haven't really seen much of like the in-between, and I think there's a huge problem with also like the, what's it called, the gender gap in between, like, you know, how many jobs women get versus how many jobs men get. There's also a problem of like what a man should do, what a woman should do, and usually in this type of society nowadays, there isn't really that much of a distinction, but I know that India still has this problem. Yeah.
I would say a lot of the generational differences that we talked about in our panel today, I would argue, from my understanding, they're even more significant or severe in India. My understanding is that, you know, when I go to India, typically the people I spend the most time with are my own family and typically my elders who kind of have their roots there and don't come here as often. So I don't really get to engage too much with the current young generations in India, but my understanding is that the culture has changed a lot and that younger generations tend to be much more progressive, but that if you look at the older generations, if I look at my grandparents, for example, their values and their beliefs are extremely different from those of a lot of the young people in today's India. So I think a lot of the issues we talked about with difficult conversations across generations, across borders, are also very much applicable in India.
India was the first country to ban TikTok, and so I don't see them much on TikTok, and that's where usually a lot of my like understanding of the world or just like knowledge of the world comes from. And so I don't really know too much about like the elections or what's going on. I just know that I know that India's like election process is completely different. It's very, very, very difficult and very different from how it's done in America. So that's kind of like all I really know about it. I'm not really too much interested in like the like Indian politics. I'm more concerned about my own country, like, or I guess the country that I live in first, rather than my home country or native country.
I think India's banning of TikTok is interesting because it kind of goes back to this idea of representation. And I feel like a lot of what I see of India online is not necessarily an accurate representation. I would say I feel like racism towards Indians is very normalized online. If you look at Instagram or TikTok, I've heard all these different platforms. And I think a lot of the, you know, the information I see a lot of Indian American content from people living here with roots in India or immigrated or something, but people currently living in India, I don't really get to see their perspective represented very often other than my own family who I speak to firsthand. I think in terms of like films and things, other ways, I sort of understand some of that from Indian filmmakers, but I think even that, like, access to those kinds of films and the amount of representation of those voices is pretty limited here, at least in what reaches me personally.
I usually visit a lot of North India more since most of my family is here, but we're hoping to visit South India too because we were trying to go to Chennai. Well, I did go to Chennai one time and I really liked it there. And then my parents have gone my parents have been everywhere in India mostly, but I really wanted to visit like the Taj Mahal one day.
Oh, yeah, it's amazing.
You would.
I think for me, when we visit, we have such limited time. It's so hard to schedule, you know, take time away from school and visit. So we really do spend the majority of the time with my family, who's mostly in Chennai, and then also I have family in Erode as well, my dad's side of the family. So we typically just spend all our time in the south, but I'd love to do more traveling at some point if I have a chance.
I know that from my understanding, he's done definitely a lot of good for the country, but also I know that I think he's very anti-Islam, like he's Islamophobic as well, where he's trying to slowly take out the Muslims in the country, which I find very wrong of him to do because the Islam culture is very much a part of India. Like India's not just it's not just all just like Hinduism or anything. It's definitely made up of different types of cultures. It's a blend of cultures. We have the most people in the world there, and so I think that taking a group out is kind of what it's basically he's kind of just removing them completely, and it's not being addressed amongst the older generation for sure. I think when I had that one conversation with some aunt or uncle back in India when I heard about that he was Islamophobic, and they did not believe me. They did not understand. They were like, no, 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 he's not. He can't do that. He's such a great prime minister. And I'm not diminishing any of the things that he has done. He has done some pretty amazing things for sure, but also just because you do so much good and you do one thing bad, that bad will always overweigh all the good that you do. And so the youth definitely know what he is doing. However, the older generation, the majority of the population in India, does not agree with that. So that's kind of my view on it.
Yeah, I don't have like too much knowledge on Indian politics, so I won't go into too much depth, but I do feel like I absolutely agree. I think my understanding is that Prime Minister Modi does not really represent the views of young people, again, that there is somewhat of a disconnect between generations. And I also think that I've personally seen how, those sorts of policies and perspectives can affect people. My mom has kind of talked about how my grandfather, with seeing all this sort of misinformation on WhatsApp, this constant flow of things, and they send it to me, they send it to my parents, there's so much misinformation on WhatsApp, and my mom has said she's seen how his perspectives of other groups, specifically of Muslims, has changed, and how he's become significantly less progressive over the years, seeing this information that kind of changes how you think. And so I think obviously I think that's due to sort of broader trends in the kind of information that's going around, and how we can, how these online spaces sort of need to be improved. But certainly I would say it's significantly affecting India's climate and sort of the polarization that we see between different groups. As Shreya mentioned, India is, and South Asia in general, is such a diverse place, and I feel like it's really interesting to see how in America, I think we're sort of trying to embrace that diversity, but in other parts of the world, we sort of see that being pushed away more.